All right, let's talk about lab reports. Now, this is the biggest chunk of your grade, so I really hope you'll take this seriously, learn as much as you can here, and just know that the reports are not going to be as hard or as overwhelming as they seem when we first go over this. All right, once you get the hang of this, it'll be no problem at all. So, I'm looking at this guide, this lab report guide. It's going to be available for you in course content as well. So, if you're a person who works better with reading a how-to paper and then doing something, then you don't really even have to watch this video. But before you leave, the one thing I want you to note for this assignment and all assignments in this lab is don't put your name on them. So you're going to have your pre-labs and your lab reports. I don't want names on any of them. This may be the only class you ever hear that in, but what Blackboard does, it allows me to conceal your names if I want. So whenever you turn something in, your name's not going to be on the assignment, and it's going to be concealed in Blackboard. And what that does, that just prevents me from giving points to people who don't deserve it or taking points away from people who do deserve it. It's a safety mechanism. So that's what we're going to do as far as that. So no names on anything. If you don't need this explanation, you're more than welcome to sign off now. So this whole format, if you wanted to, you could cut everything out and leave the bold headings, and you'd have a blank, just fill in the blank lab report that you could fill out at any point. So what's in these sections now are just the instructions. So before we look at the actual material of the report, at the very top I want you to notice always, always, always write in past tense, passive voice, and third person, okay? It's a strange way to write. It's not how you're used to reading novels or things like that. Scientific writing is really weird and really just non-personal. It's all about the facts. So that's who you're going to write. You're never going to use any personal pronouns like I, we, he, me, she, they, and you're always going to write in third person. So it's as if when you go to write your report, you're thinking as if you're observing what's going on in a lab and writing it down. So you say this was done, then this was done. This 1,000 milliliters of water was added to a beaker. The beaker was then heated to a boil. The beaker was then cooled in an ice bath, so on and so forth. So you're never mentioning any people, always in third person, and it's just all about the facts. What was done in lab. That's all the report cares about. That's all the scientific community cares about, and that's just a really good habit to get into. All right, now let's actually look at the meat of the lab report. So first you've got your intro. Your intro is two little parts. One part is a little bit of background about the experiment itself, and then the second paragraph is a quick overview of what did you actually do in lab. So say you're going to do a lab report about evolution or something. So your background paragraph would be maybe something about Darwin. So you're going to go find a good, reputable source, get a little, maybe you pull a quote, maybe you put in a summary or something like that, and that'll be your first paragraph. And you've got to reference that guy. So for every report, you have to have at least one reference outside your textbook. And if at all possible, outside of Wikipedia as well. I know it's fun to use Wikipedia, but since anybody can edit that, you really don't know if you're getting the best facts. So I prefer you go somewhere like PubMed or Scientific Magazine, something like that. Anything like that is a good source. And you'll have that as your first paragraph. And then you'll have your overview paragraph for your intro where you just say, okay, in this lab we did microevolution of this species to this species. And you give just a couple lines that gives an overview. What the intro should do is it should pique the reader's interest. So the intro is background to the experiment, and then why should I care to read this report? Get the reader interested in what you have to say. That's going to set you up to gain more readers, get a paper published someday. So that'll be your intro. Let's go on. The next thing is going to be your safety considerations. So also in the intro it has examples, how you can quote things, block quote, summary, whatever. So the next thing you're going to have is safety considerations. And in this paragraph you're going to note, did we use anything dangerous, like flames, knives, stuff along that? It's pretty cool, and that's just to let people know, okay, there are some things to be aware of as far as safety goes. And we're always using those safety protocols as well. So just note, take care that you tie your hair around the fire, or be careful when the fire burns. It seems really simple and silly, but you do need to note it, just to get people thinking, okay, if I want to replicate this experiment, let me be mindful of how dangerous some of the things we use are. All right, so the next section is materials and methods. So that's two parts. The first is materials, and that's you just lay out everything you used in the lab. It doesn't matter how small it was, how insignificant it seems. If you used it in lab, you've got to write it down. Because this is one of those things where this is the part of the scientific method where you're publishing your results. And when you do that, you need to do it in such a way where if I want to come and do the same experiment you did, I need to be able to pick up your report and be able to complete the lab or complete the experiment. And if you don't list out all your materials, I'm going to get halfway through the experiment. Maybe I don't have some critical component and my whole experiment blows up. That's just great. So you've got to list out everything you used in lab, no matter how small, including gloves, things like that. And then you've got your methods section. So list what you need. Now in the methods you list, okay, what do we actually do? And so throughout this section, you're just going to write out the step-by-step of what you did, what happened, and so on and so forth. Now, don't write it like you're giving instructions to another person. So don't say, put 1,000 milliliters of water in the beaker, then boil it. No, all you're doing is you're stating what you did so that the reader it's as if they're reading and being able to watch what you did in lab. Okay? So it's all third person still. All you're trying to do is give step by step. Here's what we did. 1,000 milliliters of water was added to a beaker. The beaker was then boiled at this degree, and then cooled in the ice bath. And then if I come and read that, I can easily replicate that. That's all you're after, being able to replicate those results. So once you finish your methods section, take a good look at it. If I couldn't give you your methods section and say, do your lab again, and you couldn't complete the lab because it wasn't enough info, then you need to add more to it. Make sure anyone reading your methods can do the experiment again. Because it's that multiple validation from different sources that's a huge part of science and getting your work published one day. So that's materials and methods. Next, you've got results and discussion. So results is, what did we get? And discussion is, what do these results mean? So in a lot of your labs, you'll have some sort of data table in your handout, and you'll just fill out what you found. And so the easiest thing to do is just take all those numbers, copy and write in your lab report. And that'll be your data. You don't have to comment on them in the results section. In the discussion, that's when you make your comments of, okay, well, we found that water boiled at 212. We think this, whatever. That's where you add your own perspective of what do we think this means? How does it affect other experiments? In the discussion, you can also put sources of error if things didn't turn out the way you want. There are a ton of times where people will think that their experiment has to turn out a certain way if it's not a complete failure. Well, there is no failure in science. There's only the results you get. And you got the results for a specific reason. So if it didn't turn out the way you wanted, tell me why. Tell me, okay, I boiled the water way too long and it spilled out and I lost 500 milliliters of water, or the glass broke or something like that. Include sources of error. Why didn't things go according to plan? There are only results to explain why you got them. That's what the discussion section is for. All right, and then lastly, we have your conclusion section. Now this is where you get to throw that rule of don't mention I, me, he, she out the window, and you can actually comment on what you think about the lab. You can say, I think this lab was great, or I think this lab was absolutely terrible, a waste of time. You can say whatever you want. This is your opinion about the lab at this point. You can talk about what you thought about the lab, what you think could be improved about the experiment. How would you make it better? How does this experiment impact your future career as a scientist, as a healthcare professional, something along those lines. That's all you need for conclusion. And that's it for the written section. So then lastly, you'll have your attachments. So if you make a data table or a pie chart or something cool, if you copy and paste your data straight in, a lot of people will just put that table in the attachments section in addition to being in the results section. So that's where you attach those things and you reference them as you go along. So if you put in a pie chart and you call the pie chart figure 1 in your results, you're talking about blah, 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 we found water boiled at 212, see the pie chart. Now all these things are unrelated, they're just random examples. And then at the very end, you've got your references. So you need at least one reference, again, outside of your textbook, ideally outside Wikipedia. We've got examples in here of how to cite them. You want them in MLA. If you use a generator, fine. Just make sure you're not including a URL in your citation. This isn't AMA format. MLA doesn't really call for URLs right now. So if you use a generator, it's going to include a URL. Just cut that out. that shouldn't be in there. And then that's really all you need to know. At the very end, there's the rubric for how points are allocated for each section. And that's everything you need. Now, I know we had to blow through that. Some things might still be unclear, and that's fine. So feel free to send me an email. I'll be willing to clarify any of this, any questions you have.